Oh, okay, the sound didn't happen. It usually does. But okay, I'm going to start with an introduction to the SFSS. So you've probably heard of us. We are the Student Society for Simon Fraser University. And we basically represent all the undergraduate students of SFU. And we provide services like the UPass, the Health and Dental Plan, and even the Food Hub, which is happening on campus. The Food Hub is basically where we give out free produce for students who need it or community members who need it. So yeah, I also host a lot of fun events because I'm the VP Student Life of the SFSS. I'm Jennifer. So yeah, that's enough about us. Do you want to do an introduction now? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I'm Sanakula, and I've been a student actually at SFU for a number of years. So thank you for having me, Jennifer, and with SFSS. Hot Squile, Eoch Tenoya, Sanakula Quiansna, Onwanaux T Tomeo Tascahotmish Snachum, A Hunt Caminum Amen, Chenquin Mantomia, Quisnatlax A T Seats. So thank you everyone who came to join today. And I just wanted to start, I know sometimes, I guess online as well, but in person we kind of hear land acknowledgements, but I find it can just be taken the wrong way sometimes. So I wanted to go a little bit further and look at how we can acknowledge and bring that awareness of our Indigenous languages. So within the campuses of SFU, they're mostly around the different dialects of Coast Salish languages, specifically looking at Hunkaminam speaking and Scohopmish Snachum speaking. So I was introducing myself in part of our traditions in the Squamish language, saying that I'm from the Squamish Nation. My name's Sanakula Weiss. And so I'm also excited to have everyone joining here today. And I just wanted to kind of have that as a kind of way to look at, I just personally find for myself and many Indigenous people as well, sometimes we often hear kind of things like we're grateful to live, work, and play on unceded territories, but I find it's just, it's not with ill intention. I just find it, it's also a little bit, it actually is a little bit offensive sometimes because we didn't invite people. So it is really important to have that situated that you are an uninvited guest in our territory, but just to kind of change the narrative around how we do land acknowledgements, and just to give that as an idea and perspective from Indigenous communities, because usually land acknowledgements are just done from a settler perspective sometimes, instead of asking how the different Coast Salish communities practice that. So as part of the things that we're going to be looking at today with plant teachings, it's a really special relationship that we have with the land, and a lot of intergenerational teaching are really important of sharing these practices. And of course, for, like today during COVID, it's very different as well. If we are wanting to go and be out in the land, it's sometimes not always accessible. And I'm just going to move my screen 1 second so I can view the chat. So if you're comfortable having your camera on, it just helps for me as a presenter so I can see some of your faces. But if you're not comfortable, that's okay as well. And so, yeah, if you want to leave any questions, put it in the chat. I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with Zoom etiquette nowadays. But yeah, if you want to do the raise hand option, or if you want to leave a question in the chat, or you can also just unmute if we have a moment to pause as well for asking with your sound on. So I have kind of, sometimes it's really nice to do this in person because then you can kind of look and touch and feel different plants, right? But I will show a couple slides, kind of pictures just as a reference, because a lot of the things are a little bit specific and they're very seasonal. So you can't just go out in your yard or in the forest or on campus and see them. But another kind of option I really like to share about Indigenous plants is looking at plants that are medicinal in our ecosystem. Some of them are Indigenous species as well. Some of them I really like to share are actually introduced species. So these are ones that are really accessible. There's actually some that really are seen of as like a weed or an unwanted plant, but I find it's one that's very useful. So I like to kind of give more focus to some of the more easily accessible plants, because some of our ecosystems, they can be very damaged or they can be very hard to reach, the ones that are really intact still. So there's always a lot of dialogue around ethical foraging. So within Indigenous communities, especially urban ones, it can be a lot harder to have access to more kind of intact ecosystems where a lot of our Indigenous plant medicines can be found. So that's why I do have a really special place in my heart for things like community gardens or any kind of more accessible place where we can look at whether it's growing certain types of foods like berry plants and shrubs, or other kinds of plants that can be a little bit easily accessible as an urban setting. So that's just, I guess, kind of a few notes and kind of the themes of what we'll be kind of looking and talking about today. So I will just start to share a screen. I'm just going to change some of the screens I have. And so I've done a few presentations within SFU, like with some of the science departments are looking. So I don't know if any of you have ever been in one of those courses, but we looked at bringing Indigenous knowledge, seeing it as being valued, as holding scientific, just kind of really being recognized, as it's really kind of seen of as mythical, or it's not always taken seriously. So I have children, so you might hear them running around in the background. So, but they're pretty busy. So just one of the screens I will now share. So there we go. With looking at some of the ways that we kind of, I guess, our perspective of looking at our ecosystem, there's a lot of different teachings that focus on how we follow the really strong power of observation. So when we're looking at our ecosystem, it's not about, if you're thinking about farming, being really focused on today, especially GMOs, or how we can force plants and different other aspects kind of to follow what humans would desire to be different things, whether it's more convenient or whether it's just the way that humans prefer to have it, instead of how a lot of ways, if we actually look at the process that nature has as an ecosystem, or the certain times of years that plants grow, it's actually kind of undoing nature. It's really a lot of purpose that's behind the different plants and ecosystems, such as estuaries, or different ways that the water does things like filtering, or the different processes. So this slide is just looking at different ways that we relate to our ecosystem as our food. And specifically, it's really kind of site specific. So it could be really different in other parts of Canada or BC, or even on islands versus the kind of lower mainland areas. So looking at how specifically for the Squamish language that I didn't grow up speaking it. I really only knew kind of small bits. So having it kind of as like a formal tone of our speaking language in like community events or ceremonies. But now, and I've got one of my classmates here, so we do the Squamish language immersion. So it's a really different way of daily conversation versus the more formal speak. So that's a really important part of bringing our language back, especially to children and all ages. A lot of our elders don't speak it anymore either, due to residential schools and colonization. So having that importance of being back on the land, there's a lot of language that's coming back to the communities that are really specific, and it can be very essential to certain areas or certain aspects of our culture. So it's just kind of looking, kind of seeing the way that we would use observation. So when we're looking at things like salmonberry, how we are following the months of the year or the moons. The Skyche is talking about a moon or a month of the year, and looking at the ways that we would be observing when the plants are ready, looking at the different seasons. So in the month earliest in the spring, you would start to see the shoots come out, so the leaves. So this is a little bit blurry of the berries, but you can see here on the leaves that these would be quite large during the summertime. So with Yetwan or with the salmonberry, we would have early in the springtime when these are just tiny shoots. The salmonberry shoots we call Temsatskai as the month of April. So you're seeing the different observation of plants starting to blossom early in the springtime after all the frost is going. And then we have the next month, the month of May, we have Tem Yetwan. And so that's the time when you would be gathering the salmonberries within the different parts of our traditional territory. And it's also special for the different neighboring communities. Not only would we harvest when they're fresh to eat, of course, but preserve for later on in the year. It's also a really strong part of our communities coming together for different seasons. Whether in the summer we have different ways of coming together for, especially around canoeing, whether it's racing or traveling to different neighboring coastal communities, as well as different ceremonies that happen throughout the winter months. So preserving the certain berries as they're ready was very vital to not only our own well-being, but also for that strong cultural connection between each of our neighboring areas. So when we see the salmonberry in English, it's a little bit similar to seeing, can I just get, actually, I'll try, it can be sometimes hard to be super interactive, but if anyone can put a comment or like a little emoji sign if you've seen or if you've eaten salmonberries. Okay. And so if you go to SFU Burnaby, you can find them on the trails. Like I mentioned, around May is the month that you kind of see them. So they can they'll start as more of an orange color, and then they can be a little bit pink and red as well as they get more ripened. And so great. Hopefully, if you haven't tried them, if you're going on campus, I'm not gonna kind of suggest like where you can just go harvest anywhere, because it is not only human food, it's really important for our ecosystem. But I will say I can tell you about the ones that are near the bus loop at SFU, but because it's part of our campus there, yes, but it's not really a part of like sharing plants is to just tell everyone where to go and harvest, because there's a lot of problems that can come with over harvesting, and also not understanding the respect that goes into reciprocity with the landscape. And so with, I'll just stop sharing for a second now. Pause share. And so with different questions that often come from usually from non-Indigenous people or communities, is asking about foraging or gathering things like such as berries. And so I find it can be quite a hard topic, because it's something that not all Indigenous people have access to within our own territory. That's why another reason I really encourage, whether it's a school or community, to have different ways of planting Indigenous plants, so that you can have kind of an ecosystem that's there for learning, or let's say picking off of them as food, as like a food garden. But it can be very hard to suggest that settlers go out into forests or different areas where as Squamish or as Hunkaminam and Squamish speaking people, that we don't always have access to as well. And so looking at how we can just build more knowledge and more community spaces that are about looking at Indigenous plants and ecosystems And as I mentioned, it's not only humans that would be eating things such as salmon berries, but birds, bears, a lot of different parts of our ecosystem. It's really entwined and integrated with having those intact plant shrubs within the ecosystem. And so I do, there's different ways, like as I mentioned, just with the salmonberry alone, that that's a really strong part within Squamish culture of looking at the months of the year, observing that different parts through the springtime. But when we look at other aspects within our ecosystem, aside from humans, bears are a very sacred animal, and they're really one that we don't want to be taking the food sources from. Today, the salmon counts and a lot of the kind of inhabitants of where salmon are, like salmon streams and rivers, it's really impacted. And so that really impacts the bear population. So we have a strong kind of connection and belief that we shouldn't be taking away from those ecosystems just for human use. So it's really something when we're looking at, like I mentioned, with let's say going to gather, or a lot of people like to refer to it as foraging. So if you're wanting to learn more about ethical or just more, I guess, better ways of looking at foraging, is not, I would hope would be an obvious one, is not taking everything you see. If there is a full bush of berries, not gathering all of them. And another kind of a teaching is when you're picking things, or if you're creating something, you have to give the first thing you do away. So a lot of, if you've ever learned about like drum making, for example, if you make a drum, it's always kind of a teaching or a protocol that you have to give that away. You can't keep it for yourself. So that can be used as well as a teaching for gathering berries or different kinds of plants and medicine, is that you're having that intent to give it away, if it's so you're not just thinking about yourself. And so with looking at that aspect of the giving, it's not about taking for yourself, that aspect. Also looking at how a lot of different cultures have their own practices of giving back, especially when it comes to gathering. And so there are many Indigenous communities, maybe it would be tobacco or other kinds of forms of something as an offering, is that you're placing in the ground. Here we do a lot of different gathering for things like cedar bark. That's during the summer, but looking at how if we're gathering berries or different leaves that would be preserved for tea. Looking at how a lot of the teachings that have been shared with me, looking at giving offerings. Some of the elders have told me that they don't practice, or they don't teach to leave tobacco here, because we don't have tobacco. We still use it as medicine, but that was introduced from other areas. But we do have a plant, kinnikinnick. I can actually, I'll have to screen share for that one, just in case most people may not know it. You may have seen it once you view it, but looking at the different ways that how we can see an offering from humans to the ecosystem. Even a lot of the teachings can be talking about sharing a song when you're outside. It's kind of giving the intention of where you're coming from. As I would like, as example, I would like to be gathering berries to give to my neighbors or my relatives, or preserve it for the winter so I can give these items away to family and loved ones, or looking at how, even as you're just going to gather plants or leaves, is before you're kind of picking them, is sharing that out loud. And there's a lot of teachings that have been shared with me about talking to the plants, or the kind of joking of like tree hugging, but literally like sharing that attention, like you're talking or giving a hug, or sharing some words about like who you are or where you come from, or even the things of like the intention of why you're wanting to learn more about the plant. Maybe it can be something you can help your family or community by gathering it, but just building that, kind of taking away that barrier that's making you think like the forest, or making you think like rocks or plants are seen of as like objects or as inanimate. But there are A lot of communities have different teachings around rocks and plants, as rocks being the oldest beings on the planet, calling as grandfathers, and trees and plants being referred to as grandmothers, as the second oldest beings on the planet. So really thinking, not seeing humans as being kind of the center of the world or the universe or ecosystem, but seeing us as we're a really young species compared to the plants, compared to the rocks and different aspects of the ecosystem. So it's kind of quite humbling work to look at, not just kind of taking away that focus of everything being focused on humans' needs or what's kind of convenient for us, as today things are really kind of focused on what's the most convenient, but sometimes the most rewarding is not the most convenient way of going around things. So now I'm just going to share.
Sorry to interrupt. We had a question from the chat. In the future, should I just raise my hand? Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see. I was gonna get to it. I was just trying to I was just going to stay on a couple topics and then kind of have a few moments where I'll get to all the questions instead of kind of pausing a few times. So I will get to the questions after I'm just sharing about the Kinnikinnick.
Sounds
so
good.
don't worry, I will get to it in a few minutes. Thank you for reminding me to make sure I can see it. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to share screen now. So this is Kinnikinnick. It's sometimes called, it's either called Kinnikinnick or it can be sometimes called bearberry. And so if you see the red kind of berries here at the bottom, so this is a plant where the leaves are mostly used. So the berries are not used by humans. It's not for food. Different uses can include things like dyeing or other kind of forms for fabrics and for weaving kind of materials, but we don't use the berries for eating for humans. But as the kind of the nickname suggests, with bearberry, looking at how just to give that idea that it's not for human use, but animals such as bears would be eating them. And so the berries are ready kind of late into the fall, so right around the time when bears are eating a lot of food before hibernation. And so with the different parts of the leaves, this is sometimes also referred to as similar to a tobacco plant. And so with the different kinds of plants, as kind of using as a similar way, but not necessarily 100% the same. But looking at having Kinnikinnick as one of the plants that can be sometimes seen of as similar to using as tobacco, such as for smoking, but it's one that can also be used as an offering. So if you're gathering plants, if you have picked the Kinnikinnick or the nickname bearberry, that's something that can be used as offering back to the ecosystem. So not just looking at the idea that I'm going to go out and pick for myself or for someone else, but thinking, how can I go and give something back to the ecosystem instead of just solely taking away. And so another part of that, also, if you don't always have access to picking plants before going out, if you're able to save any kind of seeds of berries, or if you want to purchase like a wildflower seeds or pollinator food or other kind of similar way that you can give back to the ecosystem, that you can think about, if I'm picking berries, what are the parts of the ecosystem that they're actually relying on this for their own well-being. So looking at how, bring pollinator food for pollinators, because those are plants that have flowers in the springtime, or how are there different ways that you can give back, even just like a small bag of, like pumpkin or sunflower seeds or something, of looking at different animals that would also be eating the berries that you're picking. So those are some of the ways that we would be offering things back, not just solely thinking about taking. So to the question, this can be, there's no really one answer. So the question was, are non-Indigenous people encouraged to learn and to use Indigenous languages? And so this has actually been a question that I've been asked in the past and even quite recently. And so it can be very specific to the community, to the language. Where I'm learning, there are non-Indigenous people as part of teaching or helping to revive or helping to be active in sharing this language. But a lot of communities may have different feelings, even different age groups, different people might have different views on it. So I would say it can be, it's not really like a black or white or a yes or no kind of way of looking at it. What I would say is an important step is to look at, for example, within the Squamish Nation and also Hunkaminam speaking, which is Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh as well. There's different resources online showing the different village names. So today like I mentioned at the beginning about looking at land acknowledgements as just saying, I've often even just heard like unceded Coast Salish territory. And I'm like, okay, that's talking about Seattle, that's talking about Vancouver Island, and we're in Vancouver. So which part of Coast Salish? That's like just saying like, hello, like we're in Canada, and like really vague. So I do think there are some parts of our, I guess, part of the language that can be, that I think would be important for everyone to learn if you're not from here, is looking at the different place names. Like for the Squamish language, if you like just Googled Squamish Atlas, it's an interactive map, and most of the names have a recording, so you can hear our speakers pronouncing it correctly. So there are parts that I think can be appropriate for not Indigenous or from other nations as well, to speak. A large portion of our own people who don't have access and don't have that space to learn our language. It's not a priority for us to like teach or to kind of encourage the other communities to learn our language fluently, as that's something that we're just trying to maintain ourselves, like through residential schools. So like my grandmother would be hearing it till she was at 4 or 5, and that's when she went to residential school. So her losing from that point in her life on, she wasn't able to teach my mom and her siblings. And then how can, so there's the many generational gap of just having access to learning the language. So it is, I know there's a lot of good intent behind it. I've had friends who are non-Indigenous asking like if I would recommend the language program to them who are not Squamish or not Indigenous. So I do think that there are starting points where if you want to, in a respectful way, learn more, but I don't, it's a little bit hard. Like I feel like even our own community members, not everyone feels like they're having access to learning our language. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Like there's just certain aspects of the culture when you're learning someone else's language. There's a lot of kind of perspective and worldview that comes with it. It's not just words. It's really it can be really specific to how our ancestors kind of like saw the world, but also today how things have changed since those were the predominant language. So like just different aspects of how like today a lot of Indigenous languages will have kind of modified, and it's a living language, and creating new or different words to talk about things like what do we call a computer? What do we call a TV? Like on my father's side, it's Tsimshian Samalgic speaking. So they have, my aunt when I was younger was showing me like a dictionary and recordings, and there was words for like television, remote, and then there's words for like berry picking. So looking at how we adapt to different ways, like within Squamish, we for computer, it's the elders had called it it's kind of roughly like a brain in a box. So looking at how like things, it's processing things like thinking like a person, but it's like an object, like a box. So there's like different aspects of seeing, wanting as I guess allies and settlers, how can you be in support of Indigenous languages, but that might not always be becoming like a fluent speaker of it. There's different ways of kind of bringing awareness around it, or different ways to support it. And it can be very difficult as well. So it's not kind of just a simple decision just to start learning a language. There's a lot that goes into learning different languages, just like learning anything else. Really great question though. Another question we have is, where do you recommend planting wild berry or flower seeds? So for example, if you were, let's say like picking certain leaves, one way is that you can plant like kind of berry or like spread or leaf seeds quite close to where you are, like for example, raspberries, they have leaves that are good for like sore muscles. So drinking the tea of raspberries, which are also related to salmonberries and blackberries. But the blackberries that you might see often are usually the invasive kind. The Himalayan blackberry is an invasive species, whereas within these areas, we have the trailing blackberry, which grows quite low to the ground, and it's not kind of large and tall, as its name sounds, trailing. It's quite low to the ground. But the different teas like salmonberry or raspberry, those leaves will be gathered either fresh or dried out for the winter, and those would be used for things such as muscle aches. And so having that as a way of like if you're going to gather the leaves, and you could leave seeds or different offerings back, either kind of like at the base of the plant or nearby where you were gathering. So good question. There's even with offering or with gathering, there's not always kind of like a one specific way that you have to follow exact details. It's also something that it should be kind of feeling right with you, where you're not kind of trying to kind of like follow someone else's practice because maybe you want to make it in your own way, just as something like prayers. It's not something that someone can really tell you the right or wrong way for praying or for thinking about things or giving that good intent. So even things like when we're sharing a song for our culture, it's often like a song and a prayer are not really seen of as differently. They're kind of both kind of, they can be personal and they can have, it's about the intention with it as well. And yeah, so if you have any other questions, do feel free to leave it in the chat. I'll just read it out loud if everyone doesn't mind that. Do the language and other programs Indigenous peoples have get supported by the government, and are they a part of the reconciliation of Canada, or is it something that happens in the community just to be able to preserve the culture? I highly doubt it's through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That doesn't really go a long way after like there's mandates to follow, but I don't think that commission actually, I don't know where everyone's from, if everyone here is like grown up in Canada or knows a lot about residential schools, but that's a pretty loaded question in terms of it's not the same for every community. And also a lot of communities have different levels of how much language is still spoken, whether it's formal language or day-to-day kind of everyday language. So that one, I would say maybe I'm not going to cover it. I know it's a good question to have, but there's a lot of things to say, and it's not always easy kind of just to say yes it is or it's not. I don't know with Zoom and online courses how things are for SFU this semester, but I definitely If any of you are not Indigenous, there are some pretty good resources through the different First Nations Studies department. I did my minor with the First Nation studies. So there's different resources that look at like things of looking at kind of a different history and looking at how, like, if you did go to school in like Vancouver or BC, of there really is a complete lack of resources and curriculum and anything that's really detailed to specifically different Coast Salish nations. I found, as someone who is Squamish, I never was seeing representation about really correct like visibility or inclusion about like Squamish or Musqueam or Tsleil-Waututh cultures. It was really vague about Indigenous groups being like, we have potlatches where they show off how rich they are to everyone else, and that's it. And I was like, what? Like, I was very shocked about how public schools kind of how a colonial way of talking about Indigenous cultures, not by First Nations or Indigenous people. I found it's kind of like it just doesn't hit the point. It doesn't hit the mark. It doesn't understand what we actually our perspectives and worldviews are, because potlatches are not about like beating your chest saying like I'm better than you. It's really a lot about reciprocity and about uplifting our community. But so the questions is just a little bit it's different for every language and every community, so it's not going to be the same. So that it's a good question. It's just a very large topic. But thank you for asking. And so when we're looking at the different ways today that the language is kind of being incorporated, there's many different levels where it's reteaching our children, where there's more language being taught, let's say within elementary schools or different programs. But as urban settings, we know that's not always the easiest way if you're Indigenous, but from a different area. So finding those like community hubs where we can have those shared spaces and language definitely can be, it's a lot of work. As a parent, just to say, bringing those teachings starting at a younger age. And then one more I was going to share, because the salmonberry, that's much more of a kind of a springtime plant. So I'll do, instead of screen sharing, I wanted to share, as I mentioned, it can be really important to learn about Indigenous plants and the Indigenous ecosystems, but I don't want to encourage people to necessarily like pick Devil's Club, which is really time specific to when you can gather it, not only for kind of spiritual reasons, but also like something like Devil's Club will actually change its chemical makeup, and it can be very toxic if you gather it after there's been a frost. So there's kind of different scales about which plants are accessible and which ones that it's not always going to be something that you can kind of easily learn about, just because there's so many layers of teachings around them. But one that I really, really love kind of for all ages to teach about. So this is one, as I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, that it's not an Indigenous species, but you can find it everywhere, pretty much everywhere in the world, but definitely everywhere here. And so I just literally was right outside my doorstep. So it's called, it's usually called frog leaf or common plantain. So it's a little bit kind of shaped like a frog's body. On the back, you can kind of see like veins sticking out, and you can a little bit see it's definitely hard on Zoom, not in person. You can kind of like see these like little like strings at the top at the stem where I picked it. So this is one I really love teaching. Like I have children and I've got, just all ages. It's really, you can kind of find it most of the year. So in terms of looking at our landscape, there are some that are really specific to only certain times of the year, but this one you can see through the spring, throughout most of the rest of the year after that, kind of besides just not usually in kind of January to February, but pretty much all the other months you can find them. And so sometimes there's just a few different ways that you can use them. And with recently having a lot of smoke in the air, this is one that can be really helpful because it's good for your lungs. It's good lung medicine. So there's what people usually mostly, if you're familiar, has anyone seen, we'll do another little interactive again. Has anyone, I'm sure you've all seen, but does anybody seen or have you ever heard anything, any knowledge about, about frog leaf, or it's usually also called common plantain? If anyone's ever used it or heard about it, hopefully. So we got a few. Okay, well, that's good. If you don't know anything, then you're learning something new. So with the frog leaf, as I mentioned, common plantain is another name. So the 3 ways that you know that you're identifying the right plant. Also, it has, I just grabbed like a little seed pod. So when you're looking down on the grass or even on like a sidewalk, you would be seeing the frog leaves. And then usually in the end of the summer to the fall, you can see kind of like the kind of seed pod standing up taller than the leaves that are more kind of flat to the ground. There's also one tall variety. So usually you would find the round version, but there's also a tall, kind of a tall skinny version instead as well. So you would be identifying that it's kind of around like a frog's body shape as one way that you're going to learn what to use it for, but also identifying it so you're not kind of picking the wrong plant. And so on the back, you can see those kind of like veins like sticking out. So that's the front, and then the back, you can kind of quite hopefully clearly see those strings or veins, kind of like, you know, if you eat celery, there's those strings. So kind of a similar idea to that. And then this one again is a little harder on Zoom than in person, but you can kind of see those, trying to make it kind of focus for a sec, but you can kind of see these little strings or veins that they stick out on kind of like the stem part when you pick it. And so with the frog leaf, so one of the ways for your lungs, I did have quite a few times I've seen that cedar was suggested, especially during COVID and then during the smoke, the wildfire, or the Oregon area smoke fires, that people were suggesting to boil cedar or simmer cedar inside of your home. And if you know, or you are someone who carves or weaves or works with red cedar, then you would know that it's very, very rich in oil, and that as mostly, I can't speak for everyone, but there's many different types of cedar. So a lot of our, whether it's just Squamish or a lot of communities have red cedar that we work with, but mostly it's really not suggested to drink it or to simmer it in your home. So the red cedar was one that I just felt, but we need more education around frog leaf, because this one is it's basically safe to eat and you can drink it. It's a tea, and also you can use it externally on your skin. So one of the main nicknames, if you've ever heard of it, is called Nature's Band-Aid. So the first, one of the ways that you can use it is that if you had different kinds of skin irritation, so a rash or different forms of eczema or any kind of irritation like a burn or a scrape on your skin, just thinking of that kind of nickname as Nature's Band-Aid, is that, or even something like swelling, or like if you had like a sprained ankle, or you had kind of inflammation and swelling on your joints, you could have the frog leaf. And for those kind of examples, what you could do is you could pick the frog leaves, and then you can also take just like a cloth and get it damp with cold water, and then keeping it on your skin, just if you wanted it to stay in place easier. Some people even just like tape it on like a Band-Aid, but with the frog leaf, having it intact so that it's helping the direct contact to bring the swelling or inflammation down. As well, another way that you would do, so not for a scrape because your skin is like an open wound, but another way that you can use it if you had like a spider bite or any kind of like mosquito bite or kind of like wasp or bee sting, is that you would pick it. You could rinse it if you want to be sure, if you're just outdoors, that's where it would happen, like a bee sting or something. But then you would chew on it, And so some people ask if you can kind of just like rip it apart, but kind of like the chewing on it and the saliva. So you're doing it for yourself. If it's for someone else, you would instruct them to chew it for their own application to their skin, like a mosquito bite. But chewing it and kind of breaking it down is part of the process. So that's kind of, you don't want to leave that out. So chewing on it, and then you could place it. We'll just use our imagination and see if you have like a little mosquito bite right here on my hand that you're chewing it and then rubbing it on your skin. So if you had a mosquito bite, then you would be not only, of course, we all know mosquito bites are like irritating and itchy. It's kind of a little bit nice because you're scratching it, but what's actually happening is that the frog leaf is helping to draw that kind of irritation out of your skin. And so it's kind of a little side story, but my mother a number of years ago was just biking during the summer. She stopped for water. She was at New Brighton Park. So it's the middle of the summer, really hot, and there's all the grass was like dead and kind of yellow colored, but she was just stopping to get water, and this person, she didn't know them, they were like kind of freaking out. And then so this woman got a bee sting right on her lip, or wasp, I'm not sure, but she got a sting right on her lip, and she I guess she was also allergic. She didn't have like an EpiPen with her. So my mom was like, she just literally stopped for water, and she saw this happen where she started to kind of panic. And then there was kind of a crowd starting to form of like, oh no, like let's call an ambulance, let's try and help her. And then my mom had just like, she's like, I gotta go walk like a few feet, and she's like, there's anywhere, like someone please help me find a frog leaf. And it was just completely dead grass. So she's like we got to find one, like that's all we need is just at least one frog leaf. So she found there's just two little small frog leaves. So she picked them, and she was like, you're gonna have to she like rinsed some water, and she's like, you're gonna have to chew on this, and then you're gonna have to like kind of rub and place it where the sting is. And her face within just like 2 minutes started to swell and puffy, and she was quite scared. And then my mom was just like telling her how to place the frog leaf on. And so within those like 5-7 minutes, you could see her go from just like a normal person to starting to swell and inflate and puffy. Her whole head and face was swelling, and then it went really within like 2 minutes or 3 minutes back to kind of swelling back down. And so it's something that it's often just seen of as a weed. And I think people like having like a perfectly green lawn, that it's actually something you don't want to be pulling it out. It's something that's really medicinal for many, many different purposes. So I always, my mom's the person who taught me about plant medicine. So as like a child, I'm like, yeah, you're being like dramatic, or I'm sure you think that that's really cool or something. But just seeing the different ways that frog leaf is really a wonderful plant. It's just always something as an example where it's just, I found it's a really good example to share how it's actually, you can actually use it in a day-to-day or just out seasonally. It's something that can be really useful. But even if it's just something as simple as like a scrape or a burn or a cut, or if you have different any kind of skin irritation, that's why kind of the nickname as nature's Band-Aid. But also it can be kind of cooked into a salve. So if you don't know what salve is, it's kind of like an ointment, like if you would put polysporin on a cut, for example. So it's just basically different plants such as frog leaf, cooking it with things like coconut and olive oil, and then adding things like beeswax for that kind of more solid consistency. So the different ways today that we can preserve plants, whether it's as teas or as salves, for preserving it. So of course, it's nice to be able to go and like pick it, but if you can have it preserved so it's kind of readily available and on hand as well. So frog leaf is definitely one. If you don't know many plants that what their uses are, I highly recommend. That's one simple plant that you can just really find anywhere. And it's one that you can have so many uses for. So whether it's, like I mentioned, for any kind of skin irritation, leaving it on will help to bring swelling down. Drinking it for your lungs or simmering it as like a steam for clearing your congestions or breathing it in. And also, the kind of scratching your mosquito bite kind of idea. So there's kind of multiple ways to use it, and those are hopefully you'll all remember the ways to identify it. And again, usually in the fall, you would see that kind of tall seed pod kind of sticking out near the grass. So definitely it's one that you can really find anywhere, and it's got really, really powerful uses. So we don't have, it's not a Squamish plant, like I said, like it's not indigenous to here, but in our language, we call it, it's called the slate slawin tlawaka. So it's meaning a little bed of the frog. So there are a lot of different Salish languages have words that are talking about the plant in relationship to frogs. So whether like frogs are sitting on them or it looks like them. I know in the island, within the Saanich, it's a little bit talking about a cloak, like frogs would wear it as a cloak. So I just find for my own kind of nerdy learning about plants and language is that it's just really cute seeing the different ways that our different nations describe the use of the plant. And for that, I was told that the frogs would wear it as a little cape, and that that was like humans asking like, what is this plant that appeared and what is it good for? And there was just kind of like a teaching that the frogs were like telling humans that it's a safe plant and that it can be used for your skin, as one example. So just different ways of how, from Indigenous perspectives, how we observe the landscape and how we go about seeing, giving respect and not over harvesting, and just different ways about how we want to have an understanding of listening to nature. And one other, just kind of a closing note, I guess, is looking at how if you, like I've worked with the different ethnobotany classes as well at SFU. But one of the ways that I found was interesting for me that I learned from my community teachings, as well as that's being kind of taught or studied within ethnobotany as a bigger practice, is looking at the Doctrine of Signatures. It's just a term. It's referring to how plants have a color, shape, texture, different ways that it's for humans to learn or to remember about what plants are good for or what they can be used for. So with the frog leaf, it looks a little bit, you can relate it to being similar to the shape of your lungs when you're helping your lungs breathe or clear them. Just looking at ways that plants, if you can look at shapes, colors, textures, how the plants can have similarities to our own human bodies, and just giving that more perspective of not seeing ourselves as above or in power and control of nature, but how we are part of the ecosystem, and just kind of giving that perspective. So if you want to have any questions, everybody, for the last few minutes as well. I have some, let's see, resources. I've done a lot of work this in the last few years with an organization called the Wild Bird Trust of BC, and that's within Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh territory. And I've, for just the question was asking about learning about more of Indigenous plants. So I can leave a link to their website, but I was creating kind of educational kind of posters, I guess, this year. And it's just talking a little, kind of a small portion about Indigenous plant use or how plants relate to the ecosystem. So on, even if you kind of are like on Instagram, if you followed Maplewood Flats, I've been creating content with them about Indigenous plants and ecosystem, with quite a strong lens and focus on things like birds and plants, ecosystem, kind of like preserving the land there at Maplewood Flats, which is in the North Shore. So that's one area that just kind of like on the top of my head of where I've worked with about creating Indigenous content. It's about like having access to education about it, about plants especially. So there's quite a few different, I would say, if you just kind of looked into different, whether it's different nations' websites or different educational resources, I've just seen a few different Indigenous plant communities online. So that's a place to start off. Yeah, and so this recorded. Question: how do you personally use plants in spiritual ways for your own spirituality, spiritual growth? Some of the ways of like using cedar have been taught to me about like Squamish teachings, but everyone has I guess kind of different ways, but like I guess one way of having cedar boughs in your home, of picking cedar to have it I guess some ways as like a blessing to your home, or hanging it to kind of like keep negativity out of your home as well. And then you would have it hanging either like in the 4 directions of your home or your bedroom. And then once they're kind of getting more kind of dried out, you would have to bring it to the water. So a river or a stream, even like a small creek, as to the spiritual aspect of water, and how moving water is carrying things away. So carrying it to moving water is letting go of those any negativity that you have, but not you can't just throw it in like the garbage or compost or the alley or street or something. You really have to bring it to water, otherwise you're kind of like clearing negativity away, but still holding on to it. So that part of water is really important. Some plant books, there's I've taken I think it's called Ethnobotany with SFU. So I know there are plant books that are more so talking about I guess the ecosystem, the different Indigenous plants within BC. But if you want to even just like look on SFU's like the courses that are offered, I think you can still see what the books are, even if you're not currently enrolled. Just as a kind of a starting point for looking at different text that's out there, as kind of my learning has been cultural. It hasn't been academic about plants. It's kind of it's just hard for me to situate myself into an academic context where it's been something that it's been a personal and a I guess cultural way of learning it instead of academically. But there are different texts. I definitely would even recommend like emailing. I think it's Bob Badringas teaches the ethnobotany course. I think there's like maybe even 2 or 3 now. So it's exciting that there's more things to be taught about it. Definitely, yeah. All right. So a lot of different cultures within Coast Salish areas, we often like raise our hands as definitely now on Zoom, you can kind of do it as well, but instead of like in person, we're not always clapping because we have to be kind of quiet to respect events and ceremonies happening. But we often say like haichka or hoichika as thank you, slightly, not always translated fully to English. But I just want to say thank you, haichka, everyone, for joining me. So I'm glad you were all able to join with the event today.
Yeah, thank you so much for this informative workshop. I really learned a lot. I'm sure a lot of people did as well. So I really appreciate your time. Everyone's saying thank you in the chat, so we really appreciate it. I'll get in touch with you afterwards. Did you want to leave any information about if people have more questions? Should they be emailing me and I can forward it to you, or do you want to leave any contact information?
Maybe I can leave my personal email. It's just mine first. I didn't log out of my spouse's Zoom. So it just shows Jess and Leah. But Sinakula is just my first name, sinakula@gmail.com. Is in the comments if you wanted to email or have questions.
Thank you everyone for your time. The recording will be on the SFSS YouTube, and it will be emailed out to everybody who has signed up for the workshop. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Bye.
Thank you.